Hello, everyone. I believe we are live. Hopefully, I got the time right. This is looking a little bit bright. There we go. What's up, everybody? Good to see familiar names in the chat. As usual, I rely on you guys to tell me if the audience, or if I rely on the audience to tell me if the audio is good, because I am one-man show at the moment. The rest of our team is currently on an adventure to Munich High End, so it's good to see folks in the chat. And basically what we're going to do today is have a regular Q&A session, but first I just want to talk a little bit about the new HiFiMAN Ananda Stealth. This one is, it's silver, if you can tell, and that's kind of unique. Yeah, so we'll talk about that first, and then we will get into some Q&A and then some spicy hour. Sounds like the audio is good. All right, I think we can get going. As usual, if you guys want to learn more about the headphone I'm going to talk about, check out the forum up on headphones.com, or the headphone community forum there. And I've already posted information there. So if you're watching this after the fact, I'll add a link to the description and you can check that out. In addition to that, make sure you guys check out our Discord, also linked below. And check out headphones.com and the audio files, which is where we publish all of our written material. Headphones.com is what makes all of this possible, along with our fancy friend here. If you're wondering why this is here, maybe we can talk a little bit about that shortly, but that's the B&K 528 right there. So let's talk about the HiFiMAN Ananda Stealth here briefly. This one is... Let me just see how much it is. I believe it's $550. Let me just double check. $560. So it used to be, I believe it used to be like $700, $800, something like that. But it's gone down in price. Oh, maybe that's the original Ananda, and then the Stealth is a little bit more expensive because I only see an open box one there. But yeah, you get the idea. It is in that 500 to 600 price range, maybe 700 depending on whether you get open box or not. But you can get it for 550. Okay, let's talk about what this is. This is it's a planar magnetic headphone, obviously, and it is the egg-shaped HiFiMAN planar, as you can see. For power requirements, it doesn't actually take all that much, although I did notice it took a little bit more than what I was sort of expecting from this, because I've used these in the past, and this isn't something that I have a direct comparison to with the original Ananda. I don't have one here right now, but if I remember correctly, this is they were not that difficult to drive. They're actually kind of easy to drive, and this one is a little bit more difficult. So this could be a matter of unit variance, and also just it could be that when they moved over to this revision, to the stealth magnets, it could be that it is more difficult to drive. But still, you don't really need hardly any power for this. 1 second. This is bothering me, and as I'm sure it's bothering somebody else. We'll talk about this in a second as well. All right. So back to the Ananda Stealth. So what's going on with the Ananda Stealth? Well, what they did essentially is they're moving a lot of their headphones, not all of them, but a number of them, over to the stealth magnets. And what the stealth magnets do, you guys might remember the Aria Stealth, and the HE1000 there's a stealth magnet version of that apparently as well. What it is essentially rounded edges to the magnets rather than just like flat bars. And you typically get a little bit more high frequency energy. So treble is a little bit boosted when you have stealth magnets versus the regular magnets. In the HE400 series, because they also did stealth magnets for that, there was one version of it that did have stealth magnets and one that didn't. It was like completely imperceptibly different. Like there was no difference. But with these ones, I do think that there is a little bit of a difference. And then also with the Aria, you do see that difference with extra energy there at 12K. Now, I think it's also important to think about the stealth magnet versions as another revision to this same style of headphone, this same platform of headphone. It's not just that they're adding stealth magnets in there. It's essentially a whole revision to the unit. The same thing with the Aria as well. With the Aria, you could tell like physically if you just like looked at them, the version 3 versus version 2, they physically looked different from one another. And with the Ananda, it's not quite to the same degree as with the Aria because the outside does look pretty similar. But I believe that that's what's going on here, is that it's more than just like, yes, it's the stealth magnet revision, but there could be other changes in the revising of it that you end up getting as well. And I think we can talk a little bit about that when we go through the frequency response. But for the build and the comfort and all the rest, it's essentially the same. This unit, of course, being silver, you get the same egg shape as I mentioned. It's just as comfortable. It has the same issue that I have with these and the Sundara as well, where there's no cup swivel. So how it is what it is what you get, basically, as far as where it fits on your head. But it is reasonably comfortable for most heads. I think because my head is a little bit larger, it clamps a little bit much for me in the front, but you get used to that pretty quick. And then the same issue with the when you extend the arm, it does scratch the inside. So that's a fairly normal thing for the design here. Call it a quirk or a flawed design, whatever you want to call it, but it does rub the paint off on the inside. That's fairly normal. 3.5 millimeter connectors on the bottom, and I think basically everything else is the same from the original Ananda. Now let's talk about the sound quality here. Let me just move over to that, if I may. And I'm first going to show you guys the gross data, and we're going to start with sound signature. All right, let me do that now if I can. And I'm showing you guys gross data, and then I'll show you B&K data, but I'm doing it in that order deliberately. And you'll see why. Bam. All right. So, this is the smoothed version, and smoothed to the same degree as the Target, essentially. And so we're using Harman 2018 for the Target to go through this. And as mentioned, it's a little bit brighter in the treble. But what I didn't expect was that the Ananda Stealth is also a little bit, it's got a little bit more bass. And I think that the reason for this, in fact, it's highly likely that this is just a leak somewhere, but it's not a leak on the rig. I got this same result for the bass on both rigs, and on the Gross, because it's a plate, it's much easier to get a seal. I actually think that this is a leak either between the chassis and the driver, or between the chassis and the pad, and so that slight leak is causing the resonance frequency of the driver to boost just ever so slightly, and then it gives a little bit more bass presence here, but it's very subtle. These are fairly undamped, so that means that any small leak is going to add a little bit of a bass boost, and the resonance frequency for these is ridiculously low because the drivers are massive. They're huge. Now let me go through the unsmoothed version here. Oh, that didn't work. 1 second. Nope, not that. There we go. Why is it not? There we go. Nope, that's still smoothed. What the hell? There we go. And I'm just going to show you the positional variation. And here you can see what I'm talking about. It's a little bit brighter in the treble. Keep in mind that there's going to be some unit variation across these different units from the same model. And so the peaks that you see here, they might be in slightly different spots depending on which unit it is. But this is sort of what I mentioned with the stealth magnets, where it's just a little bit brighter there across the whole range. Now we can go through the rest. So as I mentioned, the bass is a little bit boosted compared to how it used to be, And I think that's a good thing, if you look at the Sundara, it's a really clever design in the Sundara where there is a gap between the driver and the chassis, and that's why the bass rolls off on the Sundara, but it's also why it's slightly elevated, just ever so slightly on that. And with the Ananda, it almost makes even more sense to do. And I don't know if that's exactly the same. It's probably not the same thing, but you get the idea. Having a little bit of a bass boost there makes a bit of sense because you do get full bass extension as well into the sub bass. Then throughout the mids, you get a couple of wibbles here. These are sort of the driver modes that you see on, so I'm told at least, that you see on the egg-shaped HiFiMANs. Now, here's where things get interesting. If I remember correctly, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, drop it in the comments if I am wrong on this, but I remember the previous Ananda having a more significant dip at around 1.5K. It still has it here. It's still that same sort of thing, but I remember it being more. So this is, at least this unit is slightly more filled in the mids. Maybe it's like, you have a bit more treble and a bit more bass, and they may have wanted to try and get this up to compensate a little bit for that. But the downside, at least in my view, is that you get a bit more treble with a couple of extra treble peaks. Now, if you guys know the Aria, that also has a bunch of treble peaks. So you do hear these. These are not obscured or anything like that. I'm using 1/12 here for the smoothing, but you do hear these. What I will say though is that they're reasonably balanced out with one another because you have so much extra upper treble here, 12K. These lower treble peaks, they don't dominate over the upper ones, so you don't get that like compressed kind of sound. But for me, I prefer a little bit of a smoother response throughout the various different frequency ranges in the treble. In particular, the lower treble stuff is what tends to get to me. So this is what I EQ down. Now, I don't hear it exactly here. I actually hear it closer to how it is on the B&K 5128, which I will show you guys now. Actually, first, let me show you just what the compensated result looks like here. Because again, I want to get in the habit of showing compensated data. So this is relative to Harman. You can see it's a slightly brighter leaning sound signature. I'll show you that again on the B&K with our B&K target here. And if you want to see, yeah, this is sound signature, so like counterclockwise tilted slightly with a bit of a dip in the mids. That's how I'm going to describe this, right? Now let's move over to the B&K. That's our target. And this is how it looks on the B&K. So you can see here, again, there's some lower treble peaks. All the rest of the stuff's the same. Obviously, our target is different here, but it's this stuff that is different. And these are things that I tend to EQ down on this one. So basically everything from 4K up to around, I don't really do anything here, but 4K and 6.5K. I don't really adjust this all that much, the 8.7K, because what I do here is I kind of downshelf the whole thing, and then I drop the upper treble zing. And this is stealth magnets. If you think stealth magnets, this is essentially what it does. This, especially the upper treble, but like also kind of in the rest of it, you get a little bit of a extra crispness up there, which again, for me, is a bit much. But once again, pleasantly surprised by the bass response here. And again, someone can correct me if I'm wrong on the mids, but I feel that this is not as much of a dip in the mids as what they used to have. So let me just quickly run through the compensated data for the 5128, just so you get a sense of that. And here, I like looking at this a bit better. This is the average, of course, but yeah, I like looking at this better because it is a little bit more of a fair representation of open back headphones in the bass, right? It's got a more, it'd be ridiculous to say that the Ananda doesn't have linear bass, and it makes sense to show it that way, and it's not boosted like Harman, but it's also an open back headphone, so there are certain acoustic constraints that you have to deal with when you're dealing with open back planar magnetic headphones, and you can't really just get a bass shelf unless you do clever things with the leak, or if you add some sort of electrical filter in there. Now, what I do is again with my EQ, is I tend to boost the bass just a little bit here, because I'm Canadian and all Canadians like that. Fill in the mids a little bit and then drop some of the treble peaks. That's basically what I do. But don't go super granular here, because they're going to be different for you. Thankfully, these don't, the Ananda and all these sort of large diaphragm HiFiMAN headphones, they don't tend to have all that crazy positional variation. Like they're fairly consistent, depending on the position, and I think they're going to be fairly consistent across users as well, at least more so than many other headphones. But I think it's a fair bet to drop the upper treble here. This shows it around like 13.6K, so you could drop that a bit, and then 9K it shows a peak. This one is one where it's close enough to the canal entrance resonance, so this is going to be different depending on the person, I think. And then the big ones are the lower treble and then 6K. So that's basically what I do for my EQ. But that is the frequency response for the Ananda Stealth. At least this unit. I've returned. Okay, let me hold this up again. So let's. Oh, and by the way, that's with a 10 dB slope for the B&K target. Now, for the subjective aspects of sound, the subjective analysis, I should say, it's not, all the things that were good about the Ananda are here as well. It's not like this is meaningfully different from the previous one. It's still got a good sense of space and stage. It's still tight and controlled, and still, I find to be a little bit better for trailing ends of tones compared to the Sundara. I remember Mark Ryan from Super Review saying actually the Sundara, it's not as resolving as I think he was saying this to me. It's not as resolving as you make it out to be, and I think he's right. Like I think the Sundara, for me, it's more about instrument separation, not so much the clarity for trailing ends of tones. Even though it's not terrible, or it's actually fine. I just think these Anandas are just a little bit better for that, for whatever reason, and that could be actually some of the extra treble peaks, treble information going on there. But it's difficult to identify that in analysis, right? And also you don't know exactly what the FR is going to be at the eardrum. But regardless, the subjective feeling I get here is all the same things from the previous one are good here too, and all the things that the previous one wasn't great at, like for example dynamics, this doesn't get any better. Basically think of it as a slightly brighter Ananda. That's how I think of it, with a couple of extra upper treble peaks, treble and upper treble peaks. One other thing with these, and it's something this probably exists with the previous Ananda as well, but I'm mainly evaluating it on these. So this has the harmonic distortions well under control in the bass and in the like lower mids and all of that. So if you want to add a bass boost, go right ahead. But there is some second and third order harmonic distortion in the lower treble specifically, and on both channels for this. And again, this could be the same on those other the older Anandas, but it's not audible with music playing. It's not at the audible threshold with music, but it is something where if you're blasting test tones at 90 dB, you could probably hear that, anywhere from, let's see exactly where it is. It's anywhere from like 3 to 5K, I think. Let me just double check this. Yeah, it's exactly 4K. And there is that's where there is also a bit of a frequency response peak too. So, second and third order harmonic products are there. It's not something that's going to really have an impact on you if you don't EQ this, but if you are EQing this like crazy, that's something to keep in mind, specifically at 4K. For me, I prefer the Edition XS over the Ananda Stealth. I find this is one where they probably didn't need to do the stealth magnets. I think, unless of course you want a brighter sound signature. What I am impressed by though is that they also and again, how intentional this is, I don't know, but it does seem to have a little bit more bass. And so, you know how like with the Aria V3, it had that effect as well. I think with the Ananda Stealth, you get the same sort of thing. And while that is, I might think that the stealth magnet as a parameter isn't necessarily something they needed to do here. It's at least clever that they sort of balanced it out a little bit with extra bass. And to me, it's not exactly clear that that's a specific consequence of the stealth magnets either. I think that with the stealth magnets, it's mostly the treble, and with whatever they did for the revision here, it may be that there's, again, well, it's definitely some, subtle leak going on, intentional or otherwise. Yeah. That's basically all I have to say about the Ananda Stealth. It's fine if you like a brighter sound signature, but personally, I prefer the Edition XS. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. So now we can dive into some Q&A. First, let's start talking about the Ananda Stealth. If you guys have any questions, we can go over that. And then we'll dive into regular Q&A and Spicy Hour. So let's go through the first one. The first question I see here is from Brandon. Is the stock Ananda Stealth cable still a catheter? No, at least not the one that I have here. It's the regular black one that they've moved to. You actually get I should double check this. I put the cables somewhere over there, but no, it's the black one. And let's see what's next. Non-stealth is currently $500. The Edition XS is still $500. Yeah, that's what I mean. So the previous Ananda, if you can still find one, right? I think this is the thing with these, is that they're going to stealth magnets for a lot of their production. And in some cases, I think it works. In other cases, I think it's not necessary. Yeah, VSG has it right. It's the black one, not the catheter cable. How does it sound compared to the standard Anandas? Just a little bit brighter, a little bit more V-shaped. But again, the mids are also filled in just a little more. This could I only have one unit here, right? So it could be a unit, to unit difference. I have not heard the Harmonic Athena, although I think they were supposed to send me that. I should follow up and see if they can. I know a lot of people have been asking about that. I love headphones, but I don't understand graphs. It's it's a whole world, man. It's a whole world. So I guess if we try and get to a description of the sound without the graphs, it's like with the Anandas, it's always kind of been like this. And many of the HiFiMAN headphones, it's like they prioritize ear gain and clarity. So extra, it's not extra. It's like all that presence and clarity that you might not ordinarily get from more consumer grade headphones. It's there with those. The only thing is with the Ananda Stealth, it has that sort of forward character to the lower treble, similar to what you actually have on. It reminds me a little bit of the HD560S from Sennheiser, with a little bit of extra presence there, but it's balanced out a little bit better actually on the Ananda Stealth, to the point where it doesn't come across quite as biting, but I do still hear a little bit of that treble spice from some of the peaks there. So it's a clarity focused slightly treble forward presentation with a little bit of extra bass as well. That's how I would describe the sound. For genres that this does well with, I think similar to the previous one, jazz, acoustic, classical, it's great. I would caution you listening to rock and metal, although rock would be all right because it is filled in there in the upper bass and lower mids, because it's again more linear bass all the way across, so it is going to be versatile enough for rock. I think for metal you probably want a little bit less treble up there. So I actually think for metal, the Sundara might actually be the better choice. Which has better bass, Moondrop Venus, XS, or Ananda Stealth? Um, Ananda Stealth technically, but I think if you just look at the bass, Ananda Stealth, if you just isolate that, but again, like if you when you actually listen to this stuff, you can't just look at one frequency range, right? You have to think about this stuff as like all being in a relationship with one another. Um, and so I'm actually gonna say Edition XS for that, but none of them are like bass headphones. None of them are great bass, like lots of bass. That's not what they're about. If you want, so here's the thing: if you're a bass head and you want tons of bass, I'm gonna recommend. For punch and slam and that kind of quality, I'm gonna recommend the Focals. They tend to do really well at that. But if you want to EQ bass, say you want to open back headphone and you want to boost the bass with EQ and you want it to be really good and you want tons of it, go Odyssey. That's really like the Odyssey stuff is ultra low distortion, and actually this this one's quite good in the bass for distortion. Like yeah, surprisingly good. Better than most other open back headphones in the bass for that. But it's the upper mids and lower treble where you get a little bit of the harmonic distortion. So that's what you don't want to adjust on the egg-shaped HiFiMANs. So you could boost the bass just fine, and you're not going to run into any distortion problems here. But if you want to go crazy, that's really what the Odysseys are for. Where is the silver version available from? Yeah, I actually have no idea. Taryn was just like, hey, we have a silver Ananda. And I went, a silver Ananda? I need to check that out. So yeah, I have no idea. You can ask Taryn. Ask the folks at headphones.com. This was just one that they were able to send me. All right, a couple more questions here on the Stealth. Edition XS owner liked it over the Ananda OG as well. It's interesting. I kind of think I prefer the tonality of the original Ananda over both the Edition XS and the Stealth. As it is right now, I don't know if the original Ananda is going to still be in production anymore, right? So it might be the case that, if you were looking for, again, a more traditional kind of, HiFiMAN, egg-shaped HiFiMAN sound, the Edition XS is the one that sort of supplants that now. And then the Sindara is the one that is actually weirdly it's the more actually neutral out of all of them. So yeah. Let's continue. The Edition XS is the most. Oh, you can't stand the original Ananda. It's piercing in the treble. Every other HiFiMAN is better. So it could be a unit variation thing too, right? So it could be closer actually for the rest of it to this one. But this one I find to be, a bit peaky. But that's also with the stealth magnets, and the original Ananda was not. So did you weigh the unit? There seems to be two variants of the stealth. One from last year's 440 grams, and then a new one out for a month now at 400 grams. I have my scale is not here. Oh, there it is. Let's find out. I mean, I assume they're weighing those with the cables because these do not. Oh my god, I can't even weigh this without it tipping over. No. These weigh 400 grams exactly. Yeah, 400 grams for these. I saw a question about the Ananda. Ananda Stealth or Edition XS after EQ. Depends how closely you can dial it in with EQ. I had an easier time EQing the Edition XS. I think it comes down to, and if you're gonna EQ, in a way, it comes down to the comfort. And so if you have a smaller head, I'm going to say Ananda. If you have a larger head, I'm going to say Edition XS. Unless your source has a high output impedance, it won't really affect the frequency response of headphones. For sources, you need a different and more expensive measurement rig. Oh, yeah. If you want to measure sources, yeah, you need like an audio precision. Well, you don't. Actually, technically, there are cheaper ways of doing it, and you can even get better. So it's funny. You know, like, we can get into that in a minute, but like, you know how like there's like the SYNED ranking, right? Which is nonsense, of course. The real limitation to that, like from a measurement standpoint, from a data standpoint, is actually the the audio. It's the system itself that they use to measure, and there are systems out there that can actually measure lower. Not that you would ever have a reason to care, because none of this stuff's going to be audible. But there are situations where you may want to know if about noise specifically, because if you have a Campfire Andromeda or there are a couple of other like unbelievably sensitive IEMs out there where even the best scoring thing on SYNED will give you noise floor with those. So there is a reason to still want to dig deeper for noise specifically, not so much distortion. We can get into that later though. I saw a question about the subjective aspects, and I'm unable to find it now. Okay. From Jake, XS is more incisive, more detailed, bigger, and deeper than the Sundara, and I still listen to the Sundara most of the time because it feels better. I kind of feel the same way. Like, I wouldn't say it's a massive difference from a subjective analysis front, but I do think like the Edition XS and the Ananda, both of the Anandas, they are slightly better for trailing ends of tones. Like that sort of like Tyle used to call this being able to hear the finer little nuances in the music, the tone, this finer little tones in the music. And I think this is sort of what he's talking about. There are some headphones where, those tiny little gradations of volume, they're a little bit indistinct, and there are others where they're more clear. And I think that with the Sundara, if you compare that to this Ananda, which I was doing earlier because I have a Sundara there, that's the difference that I notice. When after I've EQ'd everything to how I like it. Well, both before and after EQ, you can notice this quality, but after EQ, it's a more fair comparison there. And I do notice that difference, so it could be a very subtle, fine-grained thing. Again, for me, all this stuff is frequency response of the eardrum, right? So that could be the contributing factor to that. But that's, I think if you're going up from a Sundara, right? If you're upgrading to an Ananda or an Edition XS, really, I don't think that you are getting a better tonality. I like, apart from, getting sub bass, I don't think that the tonality is better when you go from a Sundara to an Ananda or an Edition XS. It's more in these sort of intangible qualities, the subjective, aspects where there's a little bit of a, incremental improvement there. And for me, it's that aspect specifically. Some people say that the Sundara is actually punchier. Jake, I think if I remember, you were saying that the Sundara is punchier. And I can see that as well. And I think that this is also because the resonance frequency is incurred on the Sundara. And it kind of just sort of the way that it kind of goes up there a little bit before it tapers off, and drops at 30 hertz. So I think that might be, responsible for it. But also, these egg-shaped HiFiMANs, they've never been about the dynamics. So it could also be something to do with the way they couple to the head. Who knows? All right. So where does this place in the HiFiMAN lineup? this is the last question about the Ananda stealth, and then we'll get into Q&A and spicy hour. For me, I would place this. I place it behind the Edition XS. Overall, for what I look for, But if you're looking for a more bass and treble focused headphone in general, then it might be a little bit more to your taste. For me, the tonality of the Sundara is still the best that they have, and I should say this is actually quite good too. This is the HE560 V4. I don't actually know. It's the one from Adorama, or formerly from Adorama. I don't know if you can still buy them anymore, but I need to do. Wait, this is bothering me. Oh, it has triggered the white balance to go crazy on my camera. All right, we're back. It was like I was underwater there for a second. So yeah, I think it's. I'll put it this way, right? It's not the one that I would choose. Given the current lineup, I would still choose the Edition XS over the Ananda Stealth. But if you really are interested in the stealth magnet thing, and you're into the rounded edges of the magnets, and you want to try that out, this has them. I don't think it's as good of an implementation as what you get with the Aria Stealth. But that's a lot more money. It's funny, actually, going from this to the Aria is a noticeable difference in these sort of subjective qualities as well. Like, you get a lot better depth on the Aria, at least to my ear. So there's that. And I think that the treble presentation, again, they have peaks on the Aria too, but it is a little bit more clear sounding somehow for the way that the treble is. So, yeah. How does it compare to the Moondrop Venus? Good question. Venus is more neutral bright. This is more V-shaped. So the bass is a little bit tipped up with this one, whereas the Venus, it's sort of just, it's more linear and tapers off as it goes into the sub bass. This is certainly more comfortable than the Venus. The Venus is a lot heavier, but the Venus, I think its treble balance is a little bit smoother. So which one would I choose? Again, still at that price mark, I'd probably still choose the Edition XS over both of them. Golden, what's up, man? Yes, this is the HE560 V4. Okay, let's get into regular Q&A, and then we'll get into spicy hour. So, make sure you guys can actually hear me. So if I move this microphone, it like hits my keyboard. Poor design. So let us dive in. I didn't perceive the Ananda Stealth as bass forward at all, to be honest. It's only the new HE1000 Stealth that came off that way for the entire HiFiMAN lineup. So this is what I'm saying, though. It's like because there's unit variation with all of these, it's difficult to tell. But the other thing is that while this measures like it has a stronger bass, it could be that it's only this unit that has, the slight leak between the pads and the chassis or whatever's going on there to cause that. It could be that other units don't. So I have no idea. The other thing is that because it has a little bit more treble, it might not. And again, the whole balance is based around, taking everything. It could be that it just doesn't come across that way. And the consequence is more that the mids aren't quite as, distinct. But, the ear gain is all there. So you do still hear all the clarity and presence coming through. So. Granted, there are focales discounted like the Clear OG and the Allegiant models. Are these oval-shaped HiFiMANs worth it, especially if a more natural hot treble focus presentation is preferred? What? Oh, not treble focus presentation is preferred. Right. I I think the Clear OG and the Elysia are very different headphones. Very different. Like the Elysia is one where you probably want to be EQing that one. The Clear OG is definitely more punchy in the bass, but it's still a generally neutral sound signature. Like most of these open back headphones, including this one, go like, again, not the fine grained stuff, but like if you take a zoomed out look at them, they all tend to go for a more neutral kind of sound signature. If you really want lots of bass, you know, a closed back headphone is probably the way to go. So, but to answer your question, if you don't like a treble if you don't like, you know, a little bit extra treble, I think you're better off going with, I think you should EQ headphones, but between those, I think the Clear OG is probably going to be preferred. If you want, or you know, also the Sundara. The Sundara is very normal for its sound signature, which is nice. You know, there's also the Sennheiser HD650s. HD600s are fairly neutral, but if you want a warmer flavor, the HD650s. Will you review the Atrium closed? Nope, not on my radar. Right now on my plate is the Project Red. That's the next one for me, I think. And I also want to do a comparison between this and the Sundara. This is, again, the 560. Because it's funny, the drivers are very similar and they perform very similarly, but there are key differences. And it's interesting to me, you know, I'll save it for another video, like the actual analysis of those, but the sort of history of this model is interesting because it came out right after the HE500, or not right after, but like it was the next thing that they released, and they spent a lot of time, you know, trying to figure out how to get the weight down from the HE500, and then they came out with this, at least the driver, and here's the other thing that I'm kind of learning is that the drivers for all of these are. It's sort of an iterative thing. I mean, you see it with the stealth magnets as well, but like it's for all companies, right? It's not always the same everything, you know, for a driver within a headphone, and then it's just tuned by the pads. Like they do make changes to the diaphragm material. They do make changes to the magnet structure. You know, in this case, they're using it to tell a good story about the stealth magnets, right? And that's you know, it does have an acoustic effect, but you get the idea that these are not, it's not like they're taking the same concept of a driver and putting it in every headphone. And I think that, you know, there's a bit of a misunderstanding, even if you look at like the high end stuff, comparing like the Aria and the HE1000 series, those are not the same drivers. And nothing, like when I looked at them and, you know, took the pads off and like looked at the drivers, they did not look the same. So I don't know where or why that narrative exists, but or that they might be the same, but from everything I've encountered, they're not. So you're asking me how does the Ananda Stealth compare to the Edition X or XS? I've answered that already. I think I like the XS better. Could you do a bass head review? A bass head headphone review? I mean, I EQ bass, a little bit of extra bass for most of my headphones, right? So, I don't think it's because I'm a bass head. I think it's just because I'm Canadian, and as a consequence, you know, bass boost is a requirement. Oh my God, Jamie, your issue with Tidal is the reason why I moved away from it. It's not because of MQA. Like, I mean, MQA, yeah, that's one reason to move away from it. But for me, it was like it was exactly what you're describing. I was like, nope, not going to do it. Now they have Qobuz available in Canada. I need to re-up my subscription to that. Yeah. How big of an upgrade would be the Ananda Edition XS over the HE400 SE? HE400 SE, the bass rolls off, and then also there's a treble peak there. I can't remember exactly where, but it's somewhere in the mid treble, I believe, mid to upper treble, depending how you define it. If you EQ, not a massive jump, right? I think you mainly are missing out on the sub bass. If you don't EQ, yeah, it's definitely they're definitely better. The Sundara is definitely better as well. Yeah, you're asking about the Yamaha. I guess that's what it's called. I believe someone is sending that up to us. I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, I had a discussion with someone. So there are things inbound. I think that might be one of them. Do you like the Aeon 2 Noir? Yeah, I think it's good. The only issue with the Aeon Noir is that it doesn't have much going on for dynamics or for that punch and physicality. But the tonality is quite good on it. I also had some issues with channel mismatch, but I think that could just be our unit, and the way that what happens is, that they're very thick pads, which makes them comfortable, but that also means that if they don't deform in a uniform way, you're bound to get a little bit of channel imbalance there. Do you have any Aria Stealth 5128 measurements? Good question. Maybe? If I do, it's in that big thread that I did. I honestly don't remember if I did that yet. I feel like no. I think also because somebody has Aria Stealth. Maybe DMS has it. How about the objective kind of comparison between the XS and Ananda Stealth? What? Oh, like with the graphs? I don't have the XS graph on me right now, but that's we've already done that. That is linked in the forum in the description. Would you recommend getting a solid state amp for the 109 Pro? The 109 Pro doesn't need an amp. For most headphones, they don't need an amp. But having something dedicated for your headphones is a good idea. But you don't go crazy. Like, no, you don't need much power for those headphones. If there was an apocalyptic event and you could only bring 2 headphones and a CD player, I wouldn't use a CD player. What are you bringing? Oh, you mean like you can't stream? I just have like a massive, hard drive full of music. The 2 headphones, HD 600, and then Focal Utopia. Interestingly, not a planar, even though I like planars. Those 2. Having both the XS and the Ananda Stealth, which one can I drop to get the Aria Stealth? Ananda Stealth. I think you can drop Ananda Stealth. I mean, you could probably drop both of those and get the Aria Stealth because they're different enough. I don't know. Like, my instinct is to say you should have one planar and one dynamic driver headphone, and the planar. Yeah, but Aria Stealth is a great choice for the planar. You could then get a OG clear for the dynamic. Something like that would make sense. Or you could do, open back, close back, right? And one of them could be planar, one could be dynamic. That's another way to think about it. Dude, it's all about the base edition review. You'd be like the Campfire Cascade, It's a, it's a ridiculous headphone. Oh, you're talking about the wireless, true wireless Svenar. The Svenar is interesting. I mean the price tag is like way out of my budget. It's better than I thought it would be. It's probably the best HiFiMAN IEM that I've tried. It's V-shaped, but so it's not really that neutral, but it's technically impressive. Like it's detailed and it is punchy. You're quite excited regarding the Audivina. Will you review them? For for those who've heard the Audivina, I'm going to say what Blaine said about the Expanse in our last stream. I don't adore the Audivina. That frequency response is just wild on the Audivina, and it goes to show like closing off a planar magnetic headphone has its challenges. Guillerme, thank you. XS would pair well with Class A amp. SMSL A1, thanks. Yeah, I think it would. You don't need a ton of power for these headphones though. XS, I think it's a good idea to have dedicated amplifier. I think it's a good idea to have dedicated DAC and an amplifier, but you don't need anything crazy, if that makes sense. So yes, I think it will pair well, to answer your question, but I also don't think you should spend a ton of money to get a Class A amp, for those headphones, if that makes sense. Like people do this all the time, and I think we need to be a little bit more tempered with what we're actually spending money on, and measured with what we're spending money on. Like there's this thought process, like you just bought a pair of headphones and you're like, I want to maximize the performance that I get out of this pair of headphones. How do I do that? And then people think, well, maybe it's I need to get like this other amplifier that costs just as much. And really, I think you could maximize the performance of your headphones much more easily and cheaply just by doing EQ. Now, with that said, if you're doing EQ, you need to reduce the pregain depending on what you're doing for the EQ. Like if you're boosting the bass, you want to reduce pregain. And so when you do that, that's when you start to actually need an amplifier, depending on how much you go, of course. But for most of these headphones, you really don't need all that much. And I don't recommend spending more than $500 on an amplifier in general, depending on what headphones you're trying to run. So I put the vast majority of your spend into headphones, and then the rest, people used to say, oh yeah, put the same amount of money into your source equipment as you do your headphones. I think that is nonsense, or at least it's not true anymore. If it used to be true, that's one thing, but it's not true anymore. I would say 80 to 90% of your spend into the headphones. Any chance you ever review a Caldera? If someone sends a Caldera in, I'll review it. But I'm not going to ask Zach for one. I think I would definitely prioritize a Caldera because I'm very interested in that headphone. HD 800S LCD-X combo or Aria SE clear OG combo. Oof, man, that is a good question. I don't think you can really go wrong either way there. Flip a coin. I know that doesn't help. That's okay, so with the here's how I'm going to make sense of that. If you prioritize There's only one headphone there that's really good for sense of physicality and dynamics, and that's the Clear OG. The others aren't really that great for it. So if that's a quality that you uniquely care about, make sure that that's reflected somehow in your combo. If you care more about soundstage and you want and tonality, then I would say go HD800S and LCD-X as the combo there, because those are very different for their tunings, right? One of them is more of a spacious but also slightly brighter sound signal. Well, some people define it as warm, but it has that, you know, slight forwardness at around 6K. Whereas the LCD-X, by contrast, is a very warm sounding headphone. You know, in comparison, it's more relaxed in the upper mids. If you flip that around, the Aria Clear and OG Clear, they're different, but they are both closer to neutral. I wouldn't say that, you know, the LCD-X is particularly neutral. High resolve. I'm looking for a more natural sounding EDC to complement my U12T. Are RSV and Studio 4 options? I don't really recommend either of those, to be honest. I like Soft Ears as a company. I like what they're doing, or as a brand, I should say. I like, you know, but the kinds of tunings that they're going for typically. I just could not, like, the RSV has the thickest, most difficult nozzle. I couldn't get into that at all. And the Studio 4 also was a little bit. There was something not quite right with the tuning for me, at least. So I as much as I want to recommend those, because I like what they pay attention to, not really for me. I think a more natural sounding EDC to complement your U12T might be something like for natural sounding. Maybe you want to go like Dynamic Driver for that. If you haven't heard the Blessing to Dusk, maybe. Otherwise, yeah. I would suggest waiting just a little bit, rather than you know, jumping on a hype train right away, because there's Well, I'm not going to give too much away. A Blessing to Dusk is going to be my answer to that. Or even just regular Blessing 2 if you want, like, you know, if you want, you know, not the down tilted one, but the, you know, the regular one. Best $800 warm sounding headphone. Warm sounding. Man, that's tough. $800. There's really anything at $800 that's warm that I can think of. Maybe a Borealis, if they're still making them. They're not even. That's not even that warm, though. You see what I'm saying? Like, it does have, you know, good, you know, bass presence and stuff. But I don't know. I'd say go a little bit higher and get an LCD2F. I guess you could get an LCD2 Classic for around that price, but I don't know if that's the best. LCD2F if you can handle the weight. Oh yeah, the Aeolus is, but isn't that a little more? I feel like that's like at 1100, right? That might be, yeah, like at around 1100. The Aeolus would be worth considering. I got to catch up here, guys. We'll do another 10 minutes of this, and then we'll go spicy hour. 5 minutes of this, and we'll go spicy hour. All right. I've been watching a lot and reading about the DCA stealth requirements. I want to just use an ADI2 DAC FS, but I'm wondering if I need a balanced ADI 2/4. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I didn't try the stealth with either of those. If you have a stealth though, I'm going to caution people getting into the sunk cost fallacy, right? Because it could just be that you have a preference for a slightly different sound signature from the headphones. If you're like, oh, I want to get more, I want it to sound better, right? I think there's sort of two mindsets there. One is I want to get the most out of what I already have as a question of like value. The other is it's not quite sounding how I want it to sound. I want it to sound better, but it might be that you just prefer a slightly different sound signature. And this is the thing that often gets sort of missed with some of the Harman, the use of the Harman research is that that curve is it's kind of like what the largest segment there prefers, but you might be in one of the other two segments there, and even within the largest segment, there there was a more fine-grained analysis of that. There are clusterings that people fall in all kinds of different ranges along there. So it's not as clear cut as saying this matches Harman, therefore you will like it. In fact, that's a misinterpretation of the way that of that research. This is a good predictor of what most people are going to like, and if it hits that, then it is going to be likely that people will like it, but that doesn't mean that you specifically will. So I just caution people if they're trying to level up their source equipment game. It's fine to do that, but know that that's not like, don't expect a massive difference unless it's not being powered sufficiently. And then also be careful to not fall into the sunk cost fallacy trap. Because if you just spend all of that money on a different pair of headphones that was maybe more to your preference, then that would be better overall. The planar headphone project, it's on hold for now. I'll just put it that way. We've learned many things as a result of doing it, and at some point I will publish that information, what we sort of learned from it. But I don't want to jump the gun on anything. Jake, I just saw your message. Yeah. It turns out that actually, getting to a point where you have a product that sounds great is one thing, but then taking that and then figuring out a way to bring it to market is like an entirely different thing, and takes massive investment and is a huge project, and you don't know how that's going to actually turn out in practice. Like, you don't know if the results that you get are going to be what you have on hand, right? The thing that you ended up dialing it in just how you like it. But I'll just put it this way, there are interesting things in the works that I'm excited to talk about at some point, but I can't right now. What are you expecting at a high end for headphones? Nothing all that new. I think it'd be cool if Odyssey has the MM100 there, but from my understanding, that's because they had it at that one show before, but I don't know if they are at a place yet where they could send it to reviewers yet. So I'm not sure, but that would be cool if they did that. But other new stuff, nothing really that crazy for headphones. I don't know if there's any major releases right now, but who knows? We may find out. Or we will find out, but there may be something new. The best I heard so far for that, you're talking about precise and accurate imaging, would be the DT1990s. But I'm looking to upgrade for the past couple of months. So that's actually one thing that I am going to give the Beyerdynamics credit for, is that they're actually pretty good for the imaging. The DT1990 is just a treble Canon. That's both 8.5K and then 12K. It's just crazy. But yeah, I mean, accuracy for imaging. The more I spend time with different headphones, the more it feels like that stuff. Like, I'm more interested in like image separation, and to me, it's like there is an element of precision to that I really appreciate. I think it's a different question if you're thinking about like accuracy for like if you think about like if you're playing like video games, then your question is for Chrono, because he's super into that, and we did some blind testing with that. He found a bunch of differences, but what I found was what was actually the most important thing was how clear the center image was. And so weirdly, the headphones that did the best were headphones that aren't well regarded for their precise imaging, and that was the HD650s or 6XX, I think. Now that it wasn't in every case, actually, it was a lot depending on the game engine itself. So actually, in Destiny 2, the best one was actually the Maxwell with the footsteps preset, because for that the audio engine isn't limited by how far away you are. It's limited by the whole thing is always just volume, so the further away somebody gets, it's just volume dependent. Whereas in CS:GO, if you get past a certain threshold, there is no sound whatsoever. It doesn't matter how loud you have, it doesn't matter what headphones you have, you just don't hear anybody. So in Destiny 2, it was the Odyssey Maxwell with the footsteps preset, because it enhances those tones, right? With the frequency, specifically in the frequency ranges where those where those tones are commonly tokened. But in Overwatch and CS:GO, I think it was the 650s that did the best, or at least in Overwatch it was. I'm not sure. In CS:GO, I don't remember exactly if it was the 650. Anyways, we'll release the video on that at some point. In at least one of the games, it was the 650 that did the best because they had the strongest center image. How have you been handling the heat? Dude, it sucks. You're in, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're in the Fraser Valley somewhere? We'll have to do a meetup at some point. Apparently it's not a heat dome. Still sucks though. I already own an Edition XS. Would Ananda give me any new taste? Nope, not really. They're similar. They are different, right? Like I mentioned, the Ananda is a little bit more. It's got a little bit more of that sort of treble, and a little bit more bass. It's funny because I've been fairly critical of it, but there's cleverness there too, in its design in certain aspects. But no, I think that the Edition XS is the better one, at least to me. And if you already own it, I don't really see a reason to go for the Ananda. If you want a different kind of thing, I recommend going with the OG clear. All right, guys, let's get into spicy hour here, and or maybe spicy half hour. I'm not sure how long I'll go. Ask the spiciest questions. Here's where we get into, and the spicier the question, the more likely it'll be responded to. Last Rhino. Okay, this is a good one. What happened between you and ZMF? You are always very polite about their headphones, but you never review them anymore. Can you be honest and say if something happened? Yeah, it wasn't anything to do with me so much, as far as I understand. It's just that Zach didn't want his headphones to be reviewed by anybody who, we're obviously this channel is an extension of the headphones.com community, which means that we're affiliated with headphones.com, and he didn't want his headphones to be basically reflected on the channel. So that's really all that happened. But Zach and I have talked regularly about this. We've talked at shows and stuff. From my perspective, there's no ill will there. I think across the board, they just had a policy where they didn't want any review platform that has a store affiliation to cover their products. So I get that. At the same time, I also get why we still have to, as a media outlet, you have to, you can't censor yourself. You can't give any sort of preferential treatment to any manufacturer, even if you like the person. So yeah, to me, it was more just, I understood where he's coming from, but at the same time, I understand that I also recognize that, like, we cannot give special treatment. So the way I'm kind of navigating this is by saying, like, I'm not going to go out of my way to, prioritize reviewing his headphones to be, like, to be a jerk or anything like that. But if there is a specific media related reason to, like if someone sends us a Caldera, for example, and that's a headphone that doesn't have that much information on it that's published, I will absolutely cover it. Right. It's just that I'm not going to be asking Zach for that. All right. Does that answer the question? I don't want to go too far into that without, like, having, them also able to sort of, like, express themselves and their position on it, because it's I don't want to speak for them, essentially. Next one here. I can get more punch and slam from a drop X with EQ than OG clear with EQ. A drop X what? Is there something wrong with my hearing or something wrong with my OG clear? You don't want to be EQing the OG clear. Also, it depends on how you define punch and slam. If you mean more bass, that's often not what we refer to. Does driver count matter in IEMs? Not really. I mean, depending on what you want to do, potentially, but more is not always better. Will you ever have Amir from Audio Science Review on the live stream? Okay, funny you should mention. Yeah, so there was a whole big thread that kind of blew up there to do with what we're doing with the B&K 5128 and our target and all this stuff, right? Where basically there were some people, accusing us of getting the 5128 to sort of obfuscate the data. Just for a bit of background, there's no well understood or well established target for the 5128. And there is for the Gross, right? I mean, that's the gist. It's more nuanced than that, but that's the gist of it. And because there is, a well-researched reference point for the Gross, the idea of us moving to the new standard here was sort of congruent with the idea of, moving away from that research. But of course, people they were either misrepresenting us or they just weren't listening to what we were saying. We weren't saying we're moving away from the research. We were saying, we're doing this, and in addition to, showing data on the Gross, like I showed you today, where we have both Gross and 5128 data. So anyways, that whole thread kind of blew up and turned into, well, it's not worth reading. Let's just be honest. It's just, and you can tell, like, there's some people who are just, they are pure bad faith. They're only trying to score internet points, essentially, and they're cherry picking, as much information as they can, or the bits that they can, to try and, serve the narrative that they're putting forward. And it becomes pretty obvious, as soon as you start reading that. But anyways, in that thread, Blaine, I think, invited Amir to participate in a live stream where we could sort of do an airing of the grievances, or as Blaine likes to call it, sunlight is the best disinfectant. I'm a little bit hesitant to that because I don't view Amir to be a good faith actor in this space. I really don't. I think Blaine is a little bit more charitable in that sense. But at the same time, Amir brought up some good points, which is, again, what I just mentioned about, what's the point of moving to a new system where you don't have a map, right? When you have a map for the previous system. I think that, I'm paraphrasing, right? But like I think he called it a compass, right? And I do empathize with that position. I think it's worth discussing that. So we invited him to have a dialogue on the stream, to kind of express why we thought it was important to show data from multiple heads effectively. Um, and he declined. Now, the funny thing though is that we are trying to have another live stream with Dr. Sean Olive as well. So we're going to try and set that up for sometime in the near future, to maybe give him an opportunity to discuss some of this as well. But more importantly, to kind of talk about what they're doing with their, upcoming stuff to do with, the 5128, if they are, right? And we also invited Amir in the context of that, to which he also declined, underscoring to me at least that, the point that I've sort of suspected for a long time, that they're not actually interested in any of, actual science or progress or anything to do with that stuff, and really just interested in scoring internet points. But I could be wrong, I don't want to, I don't want to prevent a conversation from happening before it has the opportunity to, or has the chance to. So I am perfectly happy to be, to be wrong about that. I just get the sense, based on the dialogue that we've had so far on a forum thread, that there's no interest in actually discussing this stuff. So we're not doing it, sadly. Does having different length of hair affect headphone comfort? Yeah, it does. I've EQ'd the Meze Elite with hybrid pads to be tonally identical to my fine-tuned EQ Aria Stealth. This required fast A/B switching methodology and volume matching multiple pure tones. The only difference I could discern were in the treble driver matching, subtle soundstage differences, and transient quality or perceived CSD. CSD is not, Aria Stealth. CSD is not going to matter there. The Aria sounds sharper while the Elite sounds weightier. I think that it may actually be the case that you want one of two things. Like, if you've EQ'd them to be exactly identical, I think you can only really do that with in-ear microphones to a certain extent. But point being that if you are hearing a tonal difference, like a meatier, weightier sound, that means that they're not actually EQ'd to be the same. But I also think it's nearly impossible to do that, because what you get at the eardrum, you're never going to know that. So especially for the fine grained stuff. So yeah, I mean, HRTF effects are real, but so are headphone transfer function effects. And at least in the case of the Aria, you're not going to really encounter that much variation from one person to another. But it might be, that there's a difference in coupling for you with the Elite. I'm not sure. Could also have to do with, because they don't really seal necessarily perfectly, right? If you look at the cups, the bottom part is sort of elongated, and that often kind of hangs down below the jaw, which means that it could be incurring the resonance frequency. So even if you measure them on a rig and you EQ them to match, when you wear them, the bottom part there could be a gap there, and it could be boosting the bass. CSD doesn't matter for headphones except in really weird edge cases. It's all like time domain information generally doesn't matter for headphones. Jake, you're pulling the the weirdest clips. How would you describe punch versus slam versus bass quality? I think of punch and slam as synonymous. Okay, I think of it like this, right? If you go all the way back to Tyle Hertson's reviews of, I believe it was like the Alir, or maybe it was the Utopia. It was like the original when Focal first came up with those, headphones. He referred to them as having a punchy quality to them. He said these are very punchy sounding headphones. But even then, if you looked at the frequency response, they weren't elevated in the bass, not meaningfully at least. So that is a quality that is very difficult to identify and discern in data, in measurements. If you compare that to whatever that quality is, right? So Tyler called it punch. A lot of audiophiles call it slam. Some people call it dynamics, right? That's all in my mind referring to the same quality. It's not to do with bass level. However, bass level is if you just increase the bass, you can still hear extra bass, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's extra punchy. It doesn't mean that it's more punchy. And there are lots of examples of that. The DCA headphones are a good example of that. You get more bass, and you can even confirm this in your microphones when you're doing measurements, on your own head to check where the bass level is at. And yeah, it's always higher, but it doesn't make it more punchy, more dynamic, more impactful, whatever. So that's how I think of those two. Neil, that's a spicy comment right there. I don't think of it like that. Like, I don't want to, bash on his reviews, because ultimately his reviews are expressions of his opinion, right? Just like my reviews are expressions of my opinion. So at the end of the day, if Amir says, oh, I don't recommend this, or I do recommend this, or whatever, that's ultimately, it took me a while to figure this out, but ultimately it's not based on any, science. It's literally just his opinion of what he thinks. And I don't think he would disagree with that. Yeah, I'm not going to, denigrate his opinion about that. I think it's fine. I actually think we agree on more things than we disagree on, but I think the main area where I'm happy to be critical, and I have been publicly critical about it, even to him, is that I don't think that he approaches, the actual measurement process with all that much rigor. And I also find that the vast majority of that space is, it's pushing a narrative. The whole thing is pushing a narrative that isn't necessarily true. I think it's true in some cases, but it's not how you should approach. You should approach everything fairly, I think, and they often aren't. I find it careless, basically, the way that it's done, and I don't think that's. I think it's fairly obvious once you see a few of them, and this was also why most of us who are doing measurements are kind of critical of that. Yeah, I mean, there's what he's doing, and then there are the audio trolls who are they're not worth paying attention to. But what he's doing is worth paying attention to, because he's providing data, right? So I don't want to denigrate the reviews that he does, even if I have a different approach to the way that I review, yeah. Let's keep going here. Thoughts and opinions on the SBAF community. It's funny. There's a lot of stuff in there it's like good impressions and good information. Then there's also a lot of stuff in there where I think it's slightly misguided. But just so you guys know, that's where I came from. Like most people, when I started out in this kind of hobby, I was a headfire, right? And you go on Headphone, you read, a bunch of threads, and maybe it's on a product that you've heard or whatever. Then you realize that most of what happens in those threads is just purchase validation. It's like, this is the greatest thing ever. It's better than everything else, and you realize why they're doing it. It's because they bought it. And people are very they're very quick to judge critical takes. And so I was like, okay, I'm going over to SBAF. Basically, I was was run out of HeadFi. Not that I have anything, I quite like Jude actually, but there was enough sort of strangeness in the threads on HeadFi that I went to SBAF and found a little bit more sort of sense there, where people were more comfortable having more, well considered takes on things, more informative takes. But I think the one thing I really don't like about SBAF is that it's a very like dickish kind of place to be. It's sort of the antithesis to ASR in a sense, right? They're both information silos that are, outright trying to, basically trying to claim the authority crown, and they're having mudslinging contests and squabbling over stuff that ultimately shouldn't be squabbled over, right? Like and this is why I agree with Blaine in the sense that like there really shouldn't be this sort of divide between the objectivists and subjectivists, because nobody thinks that magic is real. It's so a lot of it is just, it's down to learning and understanding on both sides. It feels weird to think of them as sides, right? I think it's really quite dumb that we have these sort of silos that push people into different directions, and it's bullshit either way, which is sort of what we're trying to do with our forum, is to navigate a more kind of it's to make it a more inclusive place to be, a more information friendly place to be, whether we're dealing with data and objective information, and whether we're dealing with subjective impressions. It's more of a welcoming environment. At least that's the goal, right? Decommuter says ASR pushes a narrative that makes it impossible to criticize in their worldview because of an objective truth, in scare quotes. Yeah, I mean, so here's kind of where I come down on a lot of this stuff, specifically to do with the measurement equipment, where we have well researched measurement rigs, well understood measurement rigs like the Gross system, right? With we have the Harman research, and we've used it for years, right? But what people fail to recognize is that that's what you see there in data on the Gross is it's not necessarily the truth about the product. It is truth within the condition of it being on that rig, on that head, so to speak. And so all we're doing when we're using the B&K, and actually we're going to be doing all the stuff with the clone couplers as well to figure out if they're actually any good. But the idea is we want to be able to show this on more than just one head to get a truth in another condition. What is the truth about this product in a different condition? And that's what I showed you here today with the Ananda. And it just happens to be the case that the establishment for the Gross doesn't exist for the B&K. And so I think if anybody's actually interested in the truth, they should try and figure this out, like it shouldn't be repudiated. It shouldn't be, something that is, immediately, some conspiracy to obfuscate, the data. It's like this is why some of that stuff was like, really? Jeez. But it's definitely the way that measurements are treated right now by the people who are reading measurements within all of our communities, right? We all are in various different, communities, whether it's foreign communities or Discords or whatever. They're treated incorrectly often, because they're treated as, this is the truth about that product, and it may be, different if you change the condition. And I feel like that's key information that's missing. And there's like, this is the other thing, is like there is like objective scientific grounding. I mean, you've seen the measurements on both. The peaks don't show up in the same places. So as Blaine was saying in the last stream, like, you change the head, you change the ears, it can actually change the inner volume of the pad. Like, this is going to have an effect. This is not an HE6. This is an HE560. I don't know which version. But I think we can move off of that topic. We covered that enough. Because I don't want to, make this seem like it's a rant against them. Because like at the same time, we would welcome a dialogue. And I don't think. I mean, that's a place where people who are, interested in, data, and more so than, the idea of waxing poetic, about a given, audio product, they gravitate there. And so, there are good conversations that happen there too. It's just that it is overwhelmingly, narrative focused and vitriolic. And this is why the people who tend to understand this stuff, they are fairly critical. But okay, then let's move on to the next spicy topic here. Spicy, guys, spicy. What's the most unit variation you've ever tested on any one product? I wouldn't be surprised if the variation was surprisingly large. Yes. So it's the older Odyssey LCD series. And it's not specifically unit variation. It's that you didn't know which version had which pads. So one unit could measure very differently from another unit. And I asked Sankar about this a long time ago, and he told me that a lot of it was just due to them, like I think it was like the supplier for a certain part went out of business or something like that, so they had to go to another one. Things like that happen, right? And that they had to do whole, overhauls on, their product line. Now, I still think it's worth, referring to these things in model years so that you at least have, I think for all headphones, you could refer to them in model years. And it would also give manufacturers a little bit more flexibility to make subtle, revisions like with the Ananda, right? But yeah, that's where I think the strongest unit variation was. That doesn't mean that they're poorly built or anything like that. If anything, I think these are probably more poorly built, as people talk about online. I will say though, I have never had a HiFiMAN product fail. I've never had a Focal product fail. I have seen the only thing that I've seen fail in a HiFiMAN product was it wasn't anything that I used, but I saw that the strap came off of one of them, but no other issues that I've come across. No, I haven't run into any Odyssey products that have failed. I have personally owned a DCA headphone that the right channel needed to get replaced. That was the only one that I ran into. But those ones are built extremely well. The DCA headphones are built like tanks. So I think it's like there's certain failure rates. I see comments right there. People saying, a dead Ananda driver for me. Yeah, like it happens, right? I'm just saying I haven't personally run into it, So, and it's difficult to know exactly which brands are better and worse because of you don't know, like maybe more people are buying headphones from a certain brand. I will say the best brand for reliability, I imagine, or this is pure conjecture, but I expect is probably Sennheiser. I expect that Sennheiser is really dialed in for that stuff. now, even in saying that, I did encounter a 660S that had a massive channel imbalance. Anecdotal reports are not indicative of what the statistical results are. But I expect that Sennheiser is the best brand for reliability, or one of the best. Moondrop's also quite good, I imagine. What else? I expect Audio-Technica to be very good for that too. Oh yeah, I've seen HE400, the HE400 series. I've seen that stuff fail, but not anything acoustically. It was like just the mechanical design. If I remember correctly, it was like the cup, like the grill piece, like just fell off. And then also I have a pair of pads, like the original, I forget what they were called, focus pads, I'm not sure, where the pad would just sort of, it would peel off. So yeah, I've seen that stuff happen, but the drivers themselves are fine. And I think they've changed the pad design on those now. Your spicy take is that the Abyss guys equals echo chamber. I mean, this is kind of true with like all fandoms, subcultures around a brand. Basically, is what's going on, and I think that that's always dangerous. Subcultures around a particular brand. It means that you aren't able to look outside of yourself in a sense. It's all sort of part of a feedback loop, that is meant to amplify confidence. False confidence, essentially. Never had a Stax fail. Yeah. I've never owned a Stax. But yeah, no, this is what the guy from Stax was telling me. He was saying like some people, like they had issues because they'd be like eating stuff while they're wearing their headphones, and then like somehow crumbs get into their headphones. Which is yeah. I think it's kind of funny. The Dyson headphones, the best built product I own. Do you actually have one, Neil? Because that thing is ridiculous. I will say the headphone itself is well built. It's the plastic mouth thing that's terrible. I like Beyerdynamic, but they are a dying company. Their amps are good in the used market. I'm not familiar with any of their amps. Interesting. I don't know if they are or not. I mean, they've done a lot on the marketing front to get their headphones used in studios, and they're not just their headphones, right? So they've definitely gone after the pro market, which is a large market, and then they've also done a lot to get themselves into the gaming market. Now, I don't think that any of their headphones are really all that great. I certainly wouldn't choose them over an HD600 or a similarly priced, pick any brand, right? AKG. But the one thing I will say that they're doing really well is their build, like the build of the physical build of their headphones. It's actually kind of made for studios, so they're a little bit more on the rugged side. People are constantly, throwing them around. It's funny because like we release a video saying, oh, these Beyerdynamic headphones are not neutral. They have issues in the treble or whatever, right? And invariably, you will get people in the comments saying, well, these are made for studios. You didn't review them for studios. And it's like, but that should be the same. Like what? Why would you want a specifically colored presentation for studio use unless you know that, like unless you're deliberately mixing around that? It's crazy, but it just goes to show that they have a lot of inertia in that market, right? People bought them for studio use because of, if you trace the history of that, it's because they put on the box that they're made for studios. Um, so yeah, I have no idea if they are going up or going down or what they're doing, but yeah, they're doing certain things well, I think, at least. Um, how much would you spend on a cable personally? I have spent money on a cable. I spent $35 on one from Amazon. I wanted to spend um, around $100 on a cable because I liked the look of it and the feel of it, or what I imagined the feel would be. Um, but it was when I did the math, like to import it into Canada, it would have cost me like $170, and I wasn't willing to spend that. So, so I just used the ones from Amazon. Although this one is quite nice. I call this the skunk. So maybe we'll have a little bit more info on that at some point soon. But yeah, it's not the one that comes with these. This is just a cable that Blaine sent up. Pro Audio is very good at being loud and wrong. Oh, Jake with the spicy takes. No, I don't think that you're wrong about that. I think that's well put. Your DT990s broke? Wow. Yeah, here I thought they were supposed to be indestructible. Yeah, when I'm looking for cables, I'm mainly looking for things that are ergonomically better. I don't care that much about the color, to be honest. I'm more interested in the sound quality than the looks, but it does matter, I guess. You know, people buy cables specifically for the looks, and I think that's fine. It's just, it's funny because like this is just one example, right? There's so many examples. Headphones that cost $500, $600, $700. The cables don't need to be terrible, and they so often are. So, has DCA's AMTS technology become detrimental to their headphones? It's a good question. I don't think there's enough tape on that to know. I think if anything, what's happened there is it's made their headphones have a stronger variation across different heads. And it might be that it's perfect for some people, but it could also be, a real challenge for others, So it might just be that the consequence isn't that it's detrimental to, well, it depends on if you think versatility, like, having consistent response across different heads is a good, is a requirement for good, and if it is, then maybe that, yeah, but it might just be that, that tech specifically is, if that's responsible for this, because we don't know that it is, but it might be, if it is responsible, that it's just that it is, it makes people more particular about, whether they like those headphones. It makes people more split, I suppose. So not necessarily more detrimental, maybe just it makes their headphones a bit more divisive. Harry, yeah, both of those are on my radar, but it's only if somebody sends them in, right? Like I mentioned earlier. What pushes more sales? The box saying studio headphones or having high-res sticker on the box? Probably the box saying studio headphones. The high-res sticker is one of those things where it's like, it because it's so ubiquitous, it becomes ignored. Here's my bugbear. I've and maybe I've talked about this in the past. I'm not sure if I've talked about publicly, but I feel that like the spec sheets that you see like on product pages is entirely meaningless. Like apart from maybe power requirements, but even that's regularly wrong. It's important to know what's included. If you get different cables or if you get different ear pads, but like that tells you nothing about how the headphones sound. Ooh, Karina. Yeah, that's the one I do want to review. I just need to get a proper energizer. So at some point we'll get that. Yeah, I've heard good things about the Karina. So yeah. Gary Bowling. All the HiFiMAN say nano-sized diaphragm or stealth. There is way too much obfuscation. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, those things do have an effect on the acoustics. It's just not clear if it's always good, right? It doesn't tell you if it's good. It just means that it uses that tech. And the way I see that is if they're if they're adding a new thing, like in this case, they're moving to the stealth magnets. I see this as a way for them to make a revision that they may, for whatever reason, right? Like it might be because of wanting to go to a slightly different design process that's more efficient. It might be because it's that they end up with a better frequency response, or they feel that it sounds better, right? I see it as kind of like that, right? And when I remember, I should publish the video on this. I did an interview with Dr. Fang Bian at Canjim, New York, this past one, and I haven't, like, we've had so much stuff to edit that I haven't been able to actually put that one together. But I asked him about this, and he basically confirmed that. He said that the stealth magnets are a parameter that they can use, but they don't always need to use it, right? It's something that it might make sense in some situations, and it might not in others, depending on what other parameters are going on in the headphones. So they see it as an additional parameter they can tweak, and I think that's the right way to look at it. Focal Radiance is the best closed back headphone for the money. I mean, it depends where you think diminishing returns kick in, but I think the Radiance is outstanding. I think this is the thing, right? Like I think all of us who've reviewed all of the closed back focals like the tonality of the Radiance the best. The number of IEMs on the market today is an aberration, and there will be far fewer models in the future. You mean like it's a bubble, like the IEM market is a bubble. Yeah, I can kind of see that. I don't know if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me. There's a lot of momentum behind the IEM world these days. But as Precog said, it's kind of been a race to the bottom. I don't know how much, like on a per unit basis, I don't know how much they're actually making on this stuff. If they're selling it at $100 or whatever, $50, they've got to be moving a ton of volume for it to be worth it. With the high end stuff, it's a different question, right? You don't need to be moving it nearly as much. It's just sort of how the basic economics works for that stuff. But I really wonder if it might be the case that you're right, that it is a bit of a bubble, and that 5 years from now it'll only be like the key brands that have sort of risen above the rest, that are still producing it. But here's the other thing, like obviously the IEM market has gone like crazy for good quality at lower price tags, right? But like way better than it used to be. But there is also a question of like how far can they go? Like in my mind, the interesting thing there is, if everybody starts shooting for the same targets because they know that that's what sells, what did they have left to do? Is it you just come out with the same product over and over again and put a different waifu on it? Like that's not interesting. That's not better. It's just the same. So maybe the solution is, and maybe that what I'm talking about here is already sort of taking place, right? But it could be that the solution there is to have a better way of predicting what something's going to sound like for people, so they can have a more clear indication of which one is going to be right for them. So then what, like, if there's a way for that to happen, and maybe Crin's project helps with this, actually, his, what he's doing there with his squiggling thing, right? Or Crin graph specifically, it might be that that helps manufacturers cater to specific markets more easily. If there are particular clusters that end up getting a lot more purchase within the community. Hot take: the reviewer collabs sort of lost their hype since there's a new one every few weeks, it seems, with IEMs. Yes, we haven't done one yet. How come you haven't done one yet, Jamie? I'll go for another 5 minutes. Let's get the next spicy question here, spicy topic. We'll discuss one more. Jamie, I'm pretty sure you could, if you reached out, you could, we can always send you stuff too. My amplifier just turned on. That's weird. I see a question or a spicy take about reviewer collabs. I mean, in a way, what you're saying there, Decameter, is it's kind of what I'm alluding to as well, which is, them doing that is to cater to a particular audience that reviewer has, not necessarily because it's a reference target. And it's not like reviewer targets are not actually reference targets. They, unless it's like they use Harman, right? In which case it is. Oh yeah, I know what you mean. We've had some good spicy topics today, so I'm looking for one more. How a headphone looks matters and can affect the perceived sound. It depends on the person, probably. No, we can't talk about like objective measurements of detail because it doesn't exist. As in, I'm not saying the subjective aspects aren't better or worse, right? But there is no metric for that. I think the issue is like people think that when audiophiles use terms like detail. Okay, actually, I should back up. Audiophiles often use terms like detail, right, or resolution, and to people who are into headphone measurements, they'll often go, "Where is that? What is that?" I think it is the wrong choice, and maybe this is my spicy take, but I strongly feel that we are the problem by referring to these things as distinct acoustic qualities of the headphone rather than distinct and specific qualities to do with our experiences. That's all it is. Detail, resolution, dynamics, soundstage. That's not necessarily something to do with the headphone, that's a different property from frequency response. That is a description of my experience, of your experience. When you talk about these things, you're talking about something, that it is like to, listen to the headphones, and you're giving a description of that. And I think it's the wrong thing to try and attribute that to something specific about the headphones that, is happening physically and acoustically, or to take it outside of the sphere of your experience, to make it more than just a description of your experience. Because as soon as you do, like, that's not to say that there isn't something about these headphones, acoustically that is responsible for that experience that you have, and maybe it tracks across individuals as well. But the point I'm making is that as soon as you take it outside of a description of your experience, then you are immediately hit with reasonable scrutiny that there is nothing about that, in the headphones. There is no metric for soundstage. There's no metric for detail, and people will start asking you, what is that? Where is that? Show me that. Show me detail. Show me resolution. And usually that's not done in good faith. That's done to make you look ridiculous. So you're really just shooting yourself in the foot if you describe sound, if you describe like the acoustics of something, in subjective terms. Even just the idea of doing that doesn't make sense to me. When we're giving a subjective analysis, we're literally giving a subjective report of our experience. And for the same reason that you can talk about a dull or a sharp or a throbbing pain, you can talk about a, revealing or a detailed or whatever, experience when you're listening to this headphone. And we are the ones who blur that line. Where I kind of backstop that is there are people who think that you can't talk meaningfully about the experience of listening to a headphone, right? And I think you absolutely can, right? We're just giving an account of mental representational content. That's what that is. It's not an account of what is going on acoustically. It is what's going on between our ears. Which is also why Jude's MDAX thing was interesting to me, but who knows or it's not Jude's, it's Head Acoustics, but you know what I mean, right? He did the video. If you're curious about how to listen to trailing ends of tones, that's if you listen to a headphone like the Drop Panda, that is the opposite of that. It's funny because like a lot of this stuff is like you don't know what the experience is until you have it. I mean, this is Frank Jackson's What Mary Didn't Know paper, and I think that's also regularly missed in this world. But the more you experience, the more you're able to make sense of what that experience is, for clarity, for trailing ends of tones. But even, again, I go back to Tile for a lot of this stuff. He described that as, the finer little nuances in the music. So whether you describe it that way or whether you describe it, for the same reason that you can describe, a pain as a burning sensation, right? Like if you put your finger on the hot plate, right, it's a very different kind of pain than when you get a toothache, right? You can describe that experience in different ways, right? That's it's a direct parallel in my view. One thing, okay, this is probably the last point here. I see some, I don't know what that means. But yeah, okay, so there's some commentary you sometimes see when when people look at a graph, right? And they see some peaks in the treble. This is why I think it's important to show sound signature, because there's two things going on when you see peaks in the treble, like what you get with this actually. One of them is that you can't know for certain that those peaks are going to be there for you, or that they'll be in those same places. Because again, when you measure a pair of headphones on one rig, that is just the truth in that condition. It's not necessarily the truth in other conditions, which is the whole point of having more heads, more measurement rigs. Also, it's the more advanced one with the B&K, of course, but that's an additional point, right? The second thing is, it's not exactly obvious that you're going to hear, like, what if you're looking at fine grained deviation specifically. Those are, again, this is from the Harman research, those are not as strongly identified as wideband, effects. And this is directly from Dr. Sean Olive. Now, I still think that if you have a really meaningful peak at 5K, you're going to notice that, right? Like, that's that sucks. But a lot of the time when we look at raw graphs, we'll look at where the frequency response is above the target, and we will go, oh, that looks like it'll be harsh, even when in fact it actually isn't. If you were to look at that same range, and if it were below the target, you'd go, okay, that looks okay. It's so really sometimes our interpretation of raw graphs is that we think of things as being fine-grained issues when in reality they're actually wideband issues. So what I'm saying here is that they are actually audible. It's just that they're not as fine-grained as they may look if you're reading it in a raw graph. And this is why the parallel line illusion is an important one to consider, and actually why compensated measurements are in fact more useful. So yeah, you do want to avoid perceptually peaky sounding headphones, but I'll give you an example of this. The Focal Utopia has peaks in the treble. I hear the treble there as being incredibly smooth, so it doesn't have peaks for me. So that's, the more people are able to experience that, I think the better. But okay, guys, I think that's going to do it for this stream. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. And as usual, like I mentioned at the beginning, if you guys are interested in learning more about this stuff, check out the links in the description for the forum threads on various different topics. I'll add the one for the Ananda as well. And then check out our Discord, also linked in the description. And then big thanks to headphones.com for making all of this possible. Once again, if you guys are interested in reading our written reviews, that's up on headphones.com, the audio files. And if you are interested in buying headphones at all, check out headphones.com, because there's a whole bunch of them there to check out as well. Have a great weekend, a rest of your weekend, guys, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.